Okay, so now let's start discussion about the carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance scheme. Now, as discussed earlier, this scheme actually facilitates different subscribers to access the medium with high reliability of data communication, with maximum possible access, and with security as well. Now, the mandatory access mechanism of IEEE 802.11 standard is based on the carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. That is, each and every node before transmitting information over the medium in this particular standard has to use this scheme in order to transmit its information over the air interface that is actually a shared medium. Now, what is carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance? Carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance is actually a random access scheme with carrier sense and collision avoidance through random backoff. Now, as the name suggests, the carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance is formed by the combination of two techniques. One is the carrier sensing and another is the collision avoidance. Both of these techniques combine to build up a robust multiple access scheme that is currently used by the IEEE 802.11 standard. Now, the figure actually describes the mechanism of the CSMA CA multiple access scheme. We will discuss this figure in detail, but in this slide, let's suppose that we have a station over here and a station wants to transmit information over the medium. Now, what will it do? It will sense the medium that falls under the criteria of carrier sensing. So the station will start to sense the medium and it will keep on sensing the medium. Let's suppose for this much amount of time, that is commonly referred to as the DCF interframe spacing or diffs. If the medium is free for diffs amount of time, so what will happen? The station will communicate or transmit its information over the medium. However, if the medium is busy after diffs amount of time, what will happen? The station will wait for the medium to become free again. Let's suppose at this particular point, the medium is free and no information is transmitted over the medium. So the station will again sense the medium and will wait for diffs amount of time or fifths amount of time or sixths amount of time, depending on the type of data or the packet or depending on type of frame it wants to communicate. So let's suppose it wants to communicate a data frame. So it will wait for diffs amount of time, and after waiting for diffs amount of time, it will not be able to transmit its information immediately. It will again wait for some particular amount of time that is defined by the contention window. So after sensing the medium, and if the medium is busy, then the node will have to wait for diffs plus the contention window amount of time in order to transmit the next frame. Now let's discuss the entire process in further detail. Now, let's suppose if the medium is ideal for at least the duration of diffs, what happens? Then the node can access the medium at once. As discussed in the previous slide, let's suppose if a node wants to transmit some information, so obviously it will start to sense the medium, and it will keep on sensing the medium again and again and again. Let's suppose if the medium is free for diffs amount of time, what will happen? It will immediately transmit its information. Now, the medium can be busy due to data frames or other control frames that are communicated from other nodes or other stations or the access point. Now, if the medium is free, so everything is easy and the station can immediately send the frame after waiting for diffs amount of time. So what is the advantage of this particular scheme? This allows for short access delay under light load. So obviously, if the system is under light load or there are less number of stations in the system, so obviously the delay or the waiting time for each node will be reduced, and that particular station can send its information immediately after this amount of time. But as more and more stations enter the system, obviously the amount of data transmitted will increase, and obviously the channel will remain busy for a longer amount of time. So obviously the node has to wait for an increased amount of time, that is diffs plus the contention window. Now the mechanism that we discussed in this particular portion is commonly referred to as the carrier sensing phenomenon. Now, as discussed in the previous slide, let's discuss it again. Let's suppose a station wants to transmit information over the medium. So obviously it will start on sensing the medium, that is carrier sensing. And if the medium is free for this amount of time and the medium is free for this amount of time, so what will happen? It will immediately access the medium and transmit its information. However, if the medium is busy after this amount of time, then some additional mechanism is required in order to avoid collision between multiple nodes that are trying to access the channel. So this mechanism is actually formed by the combination of diffs time plus the contention window time. The contention window actually defines some random Backoff time. It actually defines some random Backoff time that is allocated to each and every node, and that particular node has to wait for this much amount of time in order to transmit the next frame. Now let's discuss it in detail. So if the medium is busy, obviously after waiting for this amount of time and the medium is still busy, then the node must wait for the duration of this amount of time followed by a contention phase afterwards. So as discussed in the previous slide, if the medium is busy, so the node cannot communicate information directly. It will have to wait for this amount of time plus the contention window time. There is actually a Backoff timer. Now each node now chooses a random Backoff time within the contention window, and the delay medium access and delays medium access for this random amount of time. So as it is clear that instead of communicating the information directly after waiting for diffs, a node now has to wait for an additional Backoff time that is actually selected randomly from the contention window. Now, if a certain station does not get access to the medium in the first cycle, it stops its Backoff timer, again waits for the channel to be ideal for this amount of time and starts the counter again. So if we consider this particular statement, if a certain station does not get access to the medium in the first cycle, let's suppose this particular station wants to transmit information over the medium. So it has waited for diffs amount of time, and after diffs amount of time, it is waiting in accordance with the Backoff timer. Now during the wait, another station transmits information over the medium. So what will happen? It will stop the Backoff timer at that particular point where another station transmits information over the medium. Now when the medium is free, what happens? It will again wait for the diffs amount of time, and instead of selecting the timer again from the beginning, it will start the timer from the point where it was left previously. So this actually reduces the wait time for each node to access the medium. So as the statement says, if a certain station does not get access to the medium in the first cycle, it stops its backoff timer. As was discussed in this slide, it actually stops its backoff timer and waits for the channel to be ideal again for diffs amount of time and starts the counter again. Now, as soon as the counter expires, then the node can access the medium, obviously only when if the medium is free. Now, if the medium is being used, then it has to wait for diffs amount of time again. Now, what is the advantage of this particular scheme? This means that the deferred station do not choose a randomized backoff timer again, but continue to count down. Obviously, if it keeps on selecting a randomized backoff timer, so obviously it has to wait for a relatively longer amount of time because the timers are actually randomized, and some other nodes might get a small timer, small backoff time as compared to this particular node. So in order to avoid this problem, the backoff timer is stopped and then restarted from the point where it was stopped. So the stations that have waited longer have the advantage over stations that have just entered, because obviously their backoff timer will be small in comparison with the backoff timers of the station that have just entered the communication means. Now, let's consider this example, but before discussing this example, let's consider this example because the number of nodes, it's a bit more simplified as compared to the previous slide. Now, let's suppose station A has some information to send and station A is communicating the frame over the channel. So obviously the medium is busy. In the meanwhile, station B also gets some information to be transmitted. Similarly, station C also wants some information to transmit, and similarly, station D also wants some information to transmit. But as the medium is busy, as station A is communicating frame across the medium, so station B will defer its communication. Similarly, station C will defer its communication, and station D will defer its communication. Now, when the medium becomes free again at this particular point, so all the nodes have to wait for diffs amount of time. As the medium was busy, so they have to wait for diffs plus the contention window amount of time now. Now, let's suppose this is the contention window or the random backoff timer that was selected from the contention window for station B. Similarly, this is the random backoff timer that was selected from the contention window for station C, and this is the random backoff timer that was selected from the contention window for station D. It can be observed that station C has the minimum random backoff timer, followed by station D and station B. So obviously the backoff timer for station B will conclude, for station C will conclude much quickly as compared to the other stations, and as it's conclude, station C will start to transmit its information over the channel. As it start communicating information over the channel, what will happen? Station B and station D will stop their backoff timer. Now at this point, when the channel is free, what will happen? Station B and station D will again wait for diffs amount of time and start their backoff timers from the point where it was left. So at this particular stage, station D has a minimum backoff timer in comparison with station B. So obviously station D will get access to the channel and will start communication over the channel. Meanwhile, station E also gets some frame to communicate. So this is the entire process. Now, still the access scheme has problems under heavy or light load. As we have seen that the carrier sends multiple access with random backoff timer is able to allow multiple subscribers to access the medium and give them fair share of the access. Moreover, it can allow reliable communication, but still there are some problems in this particular scheme because the timer is selected randomly. So there is a possibility that two stations can get the same amount of timer from the contention window. And when this happens, so both of them will access the medium simultaneously and there will be a collision across the medium. Similarly, another problem associated with this scheme is that the random values can either be too close to one another, which can cause collision, or the random values can be too high. Obviously, a high random value will cause unnecessary delay and the station has to wait for a longer period of time to transmit his or her information over the channel. Now, in order to solve this particular problem, and similarly, this problem, another flavor of CSMA CA is employed that is commonly referred to as carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance with exponential backoff timer. Now the backoff timer is select or the size of the contention window is increased exponentially whenever a collision is detected